topics, the same issues arise. All right, so if there are any questions, just raise the question or like raise the chat, raise your hand, and speak in the mic. So nasa vertical product differentiation na tayo. So vertical differentiation, ito lang siya. Consumers agree on what is preferred, right? What is the best product? What's the next best product? That's the difference between vertical and horizontal, right? So if I were to ask you, ito conceptual ulit, what is the difference between horizontal and vertical differentiation? In your own words. Okay, you can think about that. Price and quality choice with just one product. So let's say you have just one product, okay? Examine how a firm's profit will increase by offering a new quality, some feature or set of features that can be used to measure the product quality valued by consumers. Okay, so let's check out what would happen. Check this out. So a firm knows that each consumer is willing to pay extra for a higher quality product. But the extra amount varies across consumers. So I think this is pretty key. And this is related to the earlier slide. So ang interpretation natin dito is everyone agrees on the ordering of the product. That by ordering, you mean the personal, everyone, if you were to survey everyone would say like A is better than B and B is better than C. Okay. The only difference across consumers will be yung willingness to pay on A, B, and C. But having said that, everyone still agrees that A and B and C are different. Okay. So your willingness to pay will typically not just be about consumer preferences here. Well, it's about consumer preferences, yes, but it's not just about what variety you would prefer, although kasama rin yun. Other things might also come into play, right? Such as income and demographics. Okay, but all of those, of course, are influencing yung willingness to pay mo for a higher quality product. All right, so the consumer values the quality. Okay, and if the quality, the value on the quality is greater than the price, then you purchase the good. Now, the demand curve sort of looks like this, right? Well, it doesn't look like this, but ito yung specification natin. So before, price is just a function of Q, but now it's also a function of Z. Okay, so based on yung discussion natin on Z, which is the quality and the price, right? Ano ang relationship ni Z tsaka ni P? Ano ang relationship ni Z at saka ni P? Positive or negative relationship? Okay, dapat positive. The higher the quality, the higher you're willing to pay. Although, like we said, depende sa tao how much higher. Okay, yun yung key, right? But then everyone agrees that you're willing to pay higher for higher quality. With consumers buying just one good, the demand curve reflects the ranking of consumers in terms of their reservation prices for a good of a specific quality Z. Okay. So for a given good with Z, meron ka parang ranking. So each consumer, you can still interpret as a market demand curve like this in terms of yung ranking of individual consumers' willingness to pay. Okay, it's still the same interpretation. Again, I'm trying to bring it back to what we were talking about in the first week. Interpretation ng demand curve. If you're just buying one unit of the good, then the market demand curve, that line, is basically an indication of the willingness to pay. In fact, the person with the highest willingness to pay, that's the price intercept, if you remember. And then nakapila lahat ng tao. Right? Pababa ng pababa yung willingness to pay. Okay. So again here, the intercept reflects the reservation price of the consumer with the highest willingness to pay. So yun, bumalik ulit tayo dun sa dati, di ba? The Z doesn't really matter in that sense because everyone will still have different willingnesses to pay, except that pag tumaas sa Z, everyone willingness to pay will go up, but perhaps by differing amounts. Probably by different amounts. So two ways an increase in quality can shift the inverse demand curve. Suppose the initial quantity is Q1 and initial quantity is Z1. The price is P1, which is the willingness to pay of the Q1 consumer. Right? So again, this is again the interpretation from way back, right? Marginal consumer, Q1 consumer. This consumer is indifferent between buying and not buying. So the inframarginal, okay, those who are buying and have the higher willingness to pay, right? Those buy the product. So ito si first situation. Okay. Ito si Q1, ito si P1, ito si market demand. Ano mangyayari pag nag-increase yung quality? Everyone's willingness to pay goes up, but who has the higher increase in willingness to pay? Looking at this one, this left side picture, right? And starting from this line at P1 and Q1, sino yung may mataas na nag-increase ng mataas yung willingness to pay? Nabalikan ko lang to. Wala. Yeah. Asan si Q2? Q1. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, let's start with this first. The slides are pretty silent about this, but this one first. Sino yung nag-increase ng willingness to pay? By more. On the left side. Versus the right side. The right side is pretty much similar, right? You start with this demand curve, P1 yung price, Q1 yung quantity, Z1 yung quality. Nag-increase to Z2 yung quality. Okay? Sino ang nag-experience ng higher increase sa willingness to pay? Oh, walang sagot? Mag-mic na lang kayo. Consumers on the left. Okay? Sa left picture, the people who are on the left have the highest increase in willingness to pay. Anong tawag doon, guys? Anong tawag sa people on the left?
Sir, inframarginal customer.
Ayun, correct. Yung mga inframarginal. Sila yung mga bumibili na, sila yung nagtaas yung willingness to pay. Yun yung left side. Doon sa right side, yung mga inframarginal, hindi sila yung pinakamataas yung willingness to pay na increase. Yung pinakamataas yung mga people on the right which have no I would say you could call it post-marginal, right? Because those are the people who are not willing to buy at the old prices, right? Okay. but these people are the ones who are having the highest increase in willingness to pay. And under the old price of P1, are they going to buy? Yes, right? Because mas mataas na yung kanilang willingness to pay. Ito siya. Even for Q1, ang taas ng willingness to pay niya relative to P1. So, bibili na rin siya. So, under the old P1, people up to here will pay. So, all of these people who used to not buy will now buy. Okay. Now, in fairness, it's the same as this rin too. I mean, ito rin. These people here, these people here will not buy pa rin, right? So that's different. That's the situation between the left and the right. At the old price P1, okay. Oh, well, yeah. At the old price P1, so this person, for example, will now buy, right? So it's the same situation. But then the increase in the willingness to pay is largest for inframarginal here. And it's largest for the non-inframarginal on the right side. Okay. So there are two ways of modeling this, essentially, is the point. So the choice of quality amounts to a decision as to which demand curve it faces. So a shift in the Z will pivot the demand curve, right? So continue. This is like a pivot. It will pivot it along the quantity intercept or along the price intercept here. Kakapivot siya. It will shift it out. But it's really a pivot. It's a pivot out of the demand curve, depending on which situation you, on what kind of demand curve really there is here. Whether it pivots out from the quantity intercept or it pivots out from the price intercept. Yeah, so they rotate the demand curve, thereby increasing the firm's revenue at any given price. The monopolist balances the benefits of increased revenue against the increased costs of increasing quality. So an increase in quality will not just pivot and rotate the demand curve, it will also increase your costs because it will be more expensive to produce a higher quality product, either for fixed costs and or for marginal costs. So the monopolist now has two profit maximizing conditions, assuming you choose quality and quantity in a continuous way. You can use calculus, right? If it's not continuous, then you'd have to check for each level of Z or each level of Q. So for a given choice of quality, the MR from the last unit sold should be equal to marginal cost of making that unit at that quality. For a given choice of quantity, the MR from increasing the quality of each unit of output should equal the additional marginal cost of increasing the quality of that quantity of output. Okay, so this is just the same old. This first bullet is the old marginal revenue equals marginal cost. But this one says that you should also equate marginal revenue and marginal cost from the level of quantity. Of quality. Pero yung point natin dito is that it has to be continuous because that's how you do marginal revenue and marginal cost. Those are, at least from a calculus perspective, dun lang sila magiging equal, right? If it's not continuous, then you would have to just look at whether MR is greater than MC, greater or equal to MC, or MR is less than or equal to MC. I think we talked about yung difference between we might have or might not have, but one of the key ideas here is that the calculus conditions that we've been talking about really comes from yung continuity niya. If it's not continuous, then it's possible na hindi siya equal, but you will go as close as possible to equality. Now, Ito now we have a specific example of how quality affects your demand. Okay. So assume this demand function, and this is the sort of demand that increases the reservation price of the inframarginal consumer. So according to the picture we had before, ito siya. Ito siya. Right? And makikita mo naman yun dito. Right? So kung lumaki yung Z, lalaki rin yung P. You can see that. Okay? So regardless of the quality, at the price of 0, 50 units will be sold. Okay, kita niyo rin yan, because if Q is equal to 50, this is 0, okay, and 50 units will be sold. Okay. If P is equal to 0, the only way to make the right-hand side 0 is for Q is equal to 50. An increase in quality causes the demand function to rotate clockwise around Q is equal to 50. So it looks exactly like this, wherein this is 50, and then it will rotate up like this. And I think sinasabi natin kanina na continuous, assuming that Z is continuous. Like Z is a number in the same way that Q is a number, right? That Z can be any real number and not necessarily just an integer or a set of integers. So the reason I'm harping on this quality as an integer versus a continuous real number is that usually you can think of quality not as like these really fine differences along a number line, but more of like these discrete steps. Okay, so my high quality, my low quality, right? So those are not continuous, but those are discrete bins of quality. So those are, you can't really use the equality of marginal revenue and marginal cost for those kinds of issues. But the concept of profit maximization still works. You will try to bring marginal revenue as close as possible to marginal cost, okay, without marginal revenue falling below marginal cost. Ngayon, this is the demand side. So kita natin what would happen on the demand curve if you increase the Z. What happens now under costs, right? Marginal cost is independent of the quality of the product. Okay, so marginal cost is 0 with respect to Z, but design costs, the fixed costs, will rise with the quality level chosen. So fixed costs is a function of Z, and specifically it's 5 times Z squared. And the marginal cost of increasing quality is this one, 10 times Z. So the profit of the firm is now this one. This is just your revenue, quantity times price, where Z is a function of the price. Your marginal cost is 0. Okay. And then your fixed cost is a function of quality. So the profit maximizing choice of output by equating MR is equal to MC is the following. Okay. So this is marginal revenue is basically, ito lang siya. Take the derivative of this one with respect to Q. And you will find that the Q is 50 over 2 or 25, which is exactly half. Okay, half of the total market, remember, is 50, right? Because when price is 0, quantity is 50. So the X or the quantity intercept is 50. So the Q star is 50 over 2. For a given Z, right? But if you notice, the Z, right, doesn't really matter here because whatever the Z is, your Q will always be 25, right? Now here's your optimal price. P star Z times 50 minus Q star, 50 minus 25. What's this? So 25 times Z. Okay. So what do you notice about what the optimal price is? Can someone comment on the optimal price so far? Okay. Based on our old marginal revenue equals marginal cost as a function of quantity. So the price is a function of Z. So what happens if Z goes up? P star goes up. Okay. So remember, this is already the optimal price based on marginal revenue and marginal cost on quantity. Yung napansin mo is that the quantity, the Q star, okay, has nothing to do with Z, but the price has everything to do with Z. So the monopolist quantity choice is independent of the quality choice in this particular case, right? Q becomes 25, but the profit maximizing price is affected by quality. So here you would do the marginal revenue equals marginal cost on the quality side. So you compare additional revenue resulting from an increase in Z with an increase in the design cost. Okay. So now you would get the following: P star times Q star, which is this one, 625 Z, right? So an increase in Z, what happens to your total revenue? Goes up or goes down? Okay, it goes up. Now, the MC of increasing quality is 10. Okay, and that's that. Okay, so the marginal revenue of increasing quality is 625. You get the derivative of P times Q with respect to Z, that's 625. So yung optimal Z is basically 625 equals 10Z, which happens to be 62.5. So you will set the Z equal to 62.5, and the quantity will remain to be what? 25. So the monopolist quality choice is low, too low, and yun yung isa sa mga lesson natin, right? Pagdating sa monopolist. The monopolist will choose too low a quantity and too low a quality. An increase in Z rotates the demand curve upward and increases the total surplus earned from the 25 units that are always sold. The social optimum requires that quality be increased as long as this gain in total surplus exceeds the extra design cost. However, the monopolist only gets to keep the increase in producer surplus that a quality increase generates. Because the producer surplus is less than total surplus, the monopolist will stop short of producing the social optimal quality. Okay, so vertical product differentiation, offering more than one product in a vertically differentiated market. So there are two types of consumers distinguished by their willingness to pay for quality. Each consumer type buys one unit of the good per period. The consumer buys the quality of product, yielding the most consumer surplus. Okay, so here, more than one product na tayo. Okay, and more than one consumer, right? So medyo, this becomes an interesting, slightly complex case of second-degree price discrimination incentive compatibility. Okay. Now, the CS, or the consumer surplus obtained from consuming a product with quality Z, is the following: theta Z minus zeta under bar I minus P. So, himayin natin to. So, theta is a measure of the value that consumers of type I places on the quality. Okay. So remember before we were discussing that each individual will have a different willingness to pay for quality. That's the theta I. See zeta underscore I, okay? This is the lower bound on quality below which a consumer of type I chooses not to buy the product. So this is new because if Z is less than Z under bar I, right? For person I, there are two I's, 1 and 2, for example. Pag bumaba yung quality below that person's lower limit, di na rin siya bibili kasi negative na to. Negative na nga yung price, huwag ka na bumili. Okay. Now, we say here that Z underscore under bar 1 is greater than Z2 underscore 2. So, mas mataas ang gustong minimum level ng group 1. Okay? Consumers of type 1 will not buy the product unless at least the quality offered is at least Z underscore Z under bar 1. Type 2, ito siya, si type 2, are willing to buy the product at any quality provided that, because Z underscore bar 2 is 0, right? And Z underscore bar 1 is greater than 0. So walang lower limit yung Z2. They'll buy it at any quality, Z. Okay, so you can imagine this is 0. So theta 2 times Z na lang yung si person or type 2. They're willing to buy as long as the consumer surplus is non-negative, right? And the only way na maging non-negative siya or maging negative siya is when the price is higher than theta 2 times Z. Okay, so yun yung limit, yun yung gustong mangyari ni consumer 2. Okay, so this setup is quite important. So this tells us that consumer 1 has a higher minimum than Z2, and then Z2's minimum is 0. So which affects basically what this looks like here. So similar to second-degree price discrimination, the monopolist chooses a product line that identifies and separates consumers of different types. So my type 1, then my type 2. Okay. Suppose that a firm is able to produce any quality in this range, Z under bar to Z over bar. So this is the lower part of the range, and this is the higher part of the range. Marginal cost is 0 for all qualities. Pero may cost consideration pa rin siya later, I think I'll see. Z over bar, which is the upper limit here, should be greater than this one. So this is more easily satisfied when this denominator is big. Okay. Now, consumer 2 is easy because you just charge a low enough price for the consumer to buy the good. Consumer 2 will buy if P2 is less than this one. So remember, eto siya. It's as if Z underscore 2 is 0. So theta 2 times Z, Z2 specifically, minus P2. Okay. You equate that. So that means nakatali yung price of good 2, right? To this. Theta 2 times Z2. Okay. Pero si consumer 1, siya yung higher willingness to pay, right? Siya yung mas mataas yung standard. So the firm faces the same incentive compatibility constraints similar to second degree, right? For a type 1 consumer to buy the high quality product, it's necessary that this is true. So notice what this is saying. The left-hand side says that yung willingness to pay niya for quality is theta 1 times Z1, which is the quality of the one, his good, minus Z1 under bar, minus P1, which is the price of Z1, of the good Z1. This has to be higher because this is the utility, right? This is the net utility of buying your own product, and has to be greater than this one. What do you call this one? What can you, how do you describe this second part? In your own words, what's this part? This one. That's the utility when person 1 buys what? Yeah, from quality level 2. Well, pag sinabi niya na, hindi a quality 1, I will now buy the other product, right? Which happens to be P2 and Z2. So it has to be true that at least kasing laki yung utility ko from buying my own product to pretending I'm the other one and buying that product, Z2, but still having a theta 1 willingness to pay. Pansin mo yung theta 1, hindi na gumago yan. You cannot lie about that. That's your underlying fundamental. The only thing that you're choosing here is to buy the other person's product here as opposed to buying your own. And then, meron rin tayong ganitong condition. And what do you call this condition? What is this condition? What do you call that? May sumagot. Oh, non-negative. So kung non-negative, ano ibig sabihin nun? Tama. The utility of consumer 1 is non-negative. So bibili siya. So dalawa to. The first one is incentive compatibility. And the second one is non-negative utility. This one ensures bibili siya ng at least ng good one. Okay? And pag bumili siya, it has to be, yung nakukuha niya from good one is bigger than the nakukuha niya kung binili niya yung good two. Now, you substitute the price of good two kasi alam mo na yung price ng good two. It's this one. Into the first expression, it gives you this. The price is greater the higher the values that the two consumers place on quality, and the higher the quality differential between the high quality and the low quality good. Okay. So remember, we're trying to figure out what P1 is. This is saying that P1 has to be less than or equal to this expression. And P1 goes up, or this condition will allow P1 to be higher if this one the values that the two consumers place on quality, and the higher the values of these ones are, right? Theta 1 must be bigger than theta 2, and specifically the difference between theta 1 and theta 2. Tataas yung P1. And kung mataas yung Z1 versus Z2. Okay. Quality can be priced more highly when it's valued more highly by all consumers. The monopolist has an incentive to increase the quality differential between the two products to make the two goods more differentiated. So remember, from the firm's perspective, hindi niya nagagalaw yung theta because that's something that the consumers have. Yung nagagalaw ni firm is Z1 and Z2. And the higher the difference between Z1 and Z2 is, the higher the P1 could be. So when the condition is fulfilled, the condition that type 1 consumers receive non-negative surplus, this one, is now the following. Okay. Given assumption 1, it follows that the condition of non-negative consumer surplus, which is ito, can be satisfied by some Z2, which is less than Z over bar. And what is that Z over bar? It's this one. That's why we assumed assumption 1 on Z over bar. Okay. So this one is related to that assumption one we were talking about earlier. So kaya tayo nag-assume ng assumption 1. It's because we want to make sure that the consumer 1 will buy. So the incentive compatibility constraint is always satisfied for type 2 consumers. For them not to buy, it must be this. Given this, okay, it implies this. I invite you guys to actually do the substitution. And this is true. So pansinin mo muna to. Theta 1 minus theta 2 is the same here and here. So you can actually factor these out. So once you factor these out, it must be that negative Z1 plus Z2 is less than 0. So that's true because ano yung alam natin sa quality ng good for consumer 1? It's higher. And you know that the one that you're factoring out is in fact positive because theta 1 minus theta 2 is greater than 0. So therefore, Z1, negative Z1 plus Z2 must be negative. Therefore, that means that's always true because Z1 is greater than Z2. Okay. So no problem, C. Consumer 2. Okay. No problem sa consumer 2. What else? No problem siya with incentive compatibility, which means this one here, can someone interpret this? In terms of incentive compatibility, what is consumer 2 doing in this case? This one. What is consumer 2 doing? Someone answer in chat? So this is about consumer 2. Take note, yung willingness to pay niya is theta 2. Buying the bundle Z1 P1, which is the high quality. So negative siya. Okay. Assured na negative siya because of this incentive compatibility condition, this condition that comes from the incentive compatibility of the type 1 consumer. Okay, so in other words, the prices given by the following. Okay. So again, this is the utility per consumer. This one is the incentive compatibility that guarantees that for consumer 1 will buy the combination of Z and P1 that's allocated or designed for him. I think incentive compatibility. And ito yung consumer 1 will have a non-zero utility when buying his product, P1, Z1. Okay. In these cases, for sure, si person 2 will not buy person 1's product. And because you've insisted with this incentive compatibility, person 1, type 1, will not buy consumer 2's product either. So that guarantees that 2 consumer types buy their intended products. So what is the quality of the good that will maximize profits? Okay. So Ni is the consumers of each type. C1 equals C2 is equal to 0. Unit production cost for each good, no fixed costs. Pansinin niyo to. Pansinin niyo to. And compare that to this one. Now, pakiulit-ulit. Ano nga pala to? Saan galing tong P1 is less than theta 1, Z1, and so on? Incentive compatibility constraint ng firm, ng consumer type 1. Okay? And this gives you sort of a bound on P1. Pero dito, naging equal na siya. Bakit siya naging equal? Pareho lang yung right side, di ba? Pareho lang yung right side. Yung left side, pareho lang. Yung nagbago ito. Why? Naging equal. Why? Importante yan. Bakit siya equal? Any guesses? Come on. So, pag-aralan mo ulit kung saan galing to. Galing yan sa incentive compatibility ni type 1. And eto siya. What we're saying is once you found this expression, if you want to set prices and qualities optimally, i-equate mo siya. Bakit? Kasi kung hindi siya equal, ano siya? P1 is less than theta 1 Z1 minus the difference of the thetas times Z2. Optimal ba yon from the firm's perspective? Kaya niyang mag-increase ng presyo, di ba? Ano yung kaya niyang presyo na i-increase? Pag less than lang siya, pag hindi siya equal. Kaya niyang i-increase yung presyo ng P1. Kasi it's less than this. The only condition is hindi siya pwedeng mas malaki to kaysa sa right side. Tanong, bakit niya gustong pataasin to? Pag nagbebenta ka, gusto mo mataas yung presyo, di ba? Yun. Kaya you want to maximize the price such that incentive compatibility is still binding, is still working. In other words, you're limited only by the size of this one. Okay. So when P1 has to be at least equal to this. And you don't want to be lower because bibili for sure si consumer 1. Bibili siya for sure. Right? As long as P1 is less than or equal to this. Bibili siya ng type 1 type product. Okay. So you want to increase this as much as possible in order to maximize your what? Your revenue. Okay, so when you're already calculating optimality here with the different conditions, then you move from inequality constraints to equality constraints. Because this one, for sure, are you satisfying the incentive compatibility here? Yes or no? Are you satisfying incentive compatibility here? Yes or no? Yes, diba? Kasi less than equal to. And specifically, you don't want P1 to be lower kasi kita mo naman, the higher the P1, mas pataas yung profits mo. So bakit mo siya ibababa? So itataas mo si P1 until maging equal to dalawang to. And then si P2, kita na natin na dapat equal sila. Because this one guarantees na bibili si type 2 ng at least product niya. And we know that kung ganito yung price ni P1, hindi bibili ni person 2 yun. Okay. So this is the profits. Okay. Where in this second line, insert mo yung value ng P1. Okay. And insert mo yung value ng P2. And then the profits here, or after some manipulation, it becomes this. So what do we see? The coefficient of Z1 is positive. So my first question here is, pag nag-increase si Z1, tataas ba? Tataas ba ang profits ni firm? Yes or no? Oo, tataas siya. Diba? In fact, walang trade-off. You want to increase your Z1 because every time you increase Z1, your profits go up by theta 1 and N1. Doon papasok itong relationship mo ulit na P1, tataas siya pag tumaas si Z1. Diba? And you're selling pag tumaas si Z1, tumaas si P1, bibili pa rin si person 1 and tataas yung profits mo. Right? So no problem. So you want to maximize Z1 to the maximum level possible, which is Z over bar. So dito meron kasing maximum quality possible, Z over bar. Kung meron kang cost, magkakaroon ka rito ng minus something Z1. And then magkakaroon na ulit ng trade-off between Z1 and the revenue from increasing the quality and the price to group 1 or consumer 1 and the cost of doing that. But here we're assuming the cost is 0 and no fixed cost. Kung walang costs, then you're definitely ma-maximize mo siya to the absolute maximum possible. Which in this case is Z over bar. Kasi walang cost, right? Puro benefit lang. Now, for Z2, it depends on this one. Kita mo naman yan. If this thing in parentheses is positive, then pag nagtaas ka ng Z2, bababa yung profit. Okay? Yun. Pero pag negative yung nasa loob, then pag tinaas mo si Z2, tataas si profit. Okay, so there are several cases here. First is pag negative yung nasa loob. Pag mas malaki ito. The interpretation nito is in a sense, your market size willingness to pay is larger if you consider group 2 and not just group 1. So this is like the total market size times the willingness to pay for quality of group 2. So in this case, wala ring downside ang increasing Z2, right? Pag nag-increase ka ng Z2, tataas si P2, tataas si profit, and everyone will continue to buy what they're supposed to buy. And then the firm should set Z2 is equal to Z1 is equal to Z over bar. Okay. Of course, in this case, meron pa ring difference pagdating sa price. Okay. Okay. Because even if the Z's are the same, well, actually, if the Z's are the same, what happens to P1? Pareho na siya sa P2. Kasi if the Z's are the same, mawawala si theta 1 Z1 minus theta 1 Z2, which is actually Z1. Magiging theta 2 Z over bar na siya. So pareho na yung price for both group 1 and group 2. Both of them buy the same product essentially. Okay. And there's only one product and it's the same high quality product. and it will sell to both consumers. Okay, so that's selling to both type of consumers. Now, is it possible to only sell to only type 1 consumers in that case? Pag Z bar ang quality? If the monopolist chooses to sell only to type 1 consumers, the product is priced at the following: P, theta 1, Z over bar minus Z lower bar, extracting all the consumer surplus for each type 1 consumer and not supplying type 2 consumers. The profit of this strategy is this one. N1 theta 1 times this. Okay. Where theta 1, this one is basically the price. Selling to both consumers is more profitable if this is true, which leads to this condition. Okay. Again, I invite you guys to do the math. For this case, this and the term Z over bar minus Z under bar 1 is greater than 1, the condition holds. Therefore, in this case 1, where this is true, the monopolist offers a single product quality of Z and prices it at P star equals to theta 2 Z over bar in order to sell to both sides of consumers, if selling to both types is more profitable under this condition. Now, what is case 2? The case 2 is if the thing in parentheses is positive, babalikan natin to. This is positive. Okay. Remember, case 1 is negative. So this is bigger than the second one. This one in negative is bigger than this one. What is case 2? The case 2, if it's positive, this one. So if it's positive, the one inside, then profit is decreasing in Z2. Again, I will show you this one. No? If this thing inside is positive under case 2, then dahil negative times negative siya, pag nag-increase ka ng Z2, bababa ang profit. Okay, so that's case 2. So every time ka mag-increase ng quality for good 2, you will get hurt by lowering your profit. And therefore, what you would do is to set Z1 star, okay? No, set Z2 as low as possible, but not necessarily to its minimum level. Okay, so here Z1 star will still be equal to the highest possible number, which is Z over bar. Z2 will be seen as set as low as possible, but not necessarily to its minimum. So let's first look at type 1 consumers. So kailangan non-negative si type 1 consumer. Since Z1 star is equal to Z over bar, and this is true, again, notice the equality here. And substituting it to the non-negativity constraint gives you the following. So pansin mo, the only thing that we don't know is Z2, right? So what this sort of determines what Z2 is. So Z2 is not 0, but it will be this. It will be theta 1 Z under bar, which is the lowest amount of quality acceptable to person 2, which is not necessarily 0, divided by theta 1 over theta 2. So the impact of the assumption that the monopolist cannot distinguish the two consumer types. The monopolist would like to set Z2 lower but cannot. If the monopolist is to offer products that make the consumer self-select into their true types. Kung masyadong mababa yung quality na binigay mo kay 2, then hindi na sila self-select. Profit maximizing prices for the two goods in this case is Z2, which happens to be this one. Okay, which ensures that each one buys their own products. And then P2 is this one, okay? Which happens to be the same Z as the C2. Dapat may start. Oh, well, kaya siya may start. Dito na siya. So P2 star is a function of the lowest quality level of person 1 times, these status here. Substituting Z2 and Z1 star equals Z over bar into yung price ng P1. Then the price of P1 is basically this one, which is the highest possible utility given to person 1, right? Because this is the highest possible Z and his lowest minimum. So lahat na to makukuha ni monopolist because you're setting the price equal to this whole thing. So the consumer type 1 consumers, the type 1 consumers are charged their maximum willingness to pay. So notice that this one is the truly maximum, right? Because their Z here happens to be the highest Z possible. Their lower Z, this is some parameter, right? And this is also some parameter. And then you're setting the P1 star such that the entire surplus, the consumer 1, is being taken in by the monopolist. Meanwhile, si consumer 2, wow, gusto mo silang, binigyan mo sila ng konting quality. Okay. Well, sorry. Consumer 2 is charge your maximum willingness to pay. Consumer 1, okay, consumers are charged their maximum willingness to pay for the highest quality possible. And see, consumer 2, the lower one, will be given some quality. Okay, it's not 0. So this ensures that both 1 and 2 will buy, and as is usual under second degree price discrimination, yung buong willingness to pay ni consumer 1 kukunin. Okay. Kukunin ni monopolist. And kukunin rin from the type 1. Yung maximum willingness to pay for the highest quality possible, which happens to be ito. This is the highest quality, but it's possible for Z2. In offering both goods, the monopolist extracts all the consumer surplus, but has to compromise on the qualities that are offered. So here are the, here's the aggregate profit. This one. And the intuition behind this result, that in one case, the monopolist wants to offer only one high quality good, while in the other, the firm offers both a high quality and a low quality good. When offering only the high quality good, it's priced at this. When offering a high and low quality good, the high quality good is offered at this, and the low quality good is offered at this. So offering two quality differentiated goods allows the monopolist to charge a higher price to type 1. And again, si type 1 siya yung gusto talaga ng high willingness to pay for quality. But forces the monopolist to lower the price it charges to type 2 consumers. So pababa yung price and yung Z to type 2, but not necessarily to 0. For this strategy to be profitable, there needs to be sufficiently many type 1 consumers compared to type 2. So yun yung condition 2 na sinabi natin kanina. Yun yung case 2. Which is ito. This is the case 2. Okay. So as you can see, the vertical price differentiation is very closely related to yung second degree incentive compatibility and non-negativity constraints. So it's very interesting, also very complex. So I invite you guys to look over and try to do this math and to make sure you understand conceptually what's going on here. Okay, so since wala na tayong time, meron tayong meeting next Tuesday, and then yung midterm ninyo is the next Thursday. So wala tayong class that Thursday. And I will consider strongly to not do yung safe exam. I'll make an announcement. Probably matutuloy naman yan. I don't see a problem with that. Yes, class hours, yung midterm exam. So be there, be available 2:30. And sino dito yung may gustong pumunta sa school for the internet? Meron ba? Kung merong isa, ay nagsabi na ako na gusto ko ng kwarto eh. I just want to know kung matutuloy yun, kung may gusto talaga ng kwarto dito. I'll stop recording.